I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years.
And I have given all the proofs of who was involved with Diddy. I have presented the videotape of Diddy's parties as evidence. Now no one can save Diddy and the other celebs.
Because when word started spreading that 50 Cent's documentary was pulling back the curtain on Diddy and Jay-Z, the reaction wasn't excitement, it was silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean nothing's happening, but everything is. Phones stopped ringing, posts got deleted, and suddenly, people who never miss a chance to tweet had nothing to say. This wasn't a casual expose. This felt like a vault cracking open. According to early reactions, the documentary doesn't just tell stories, it stitches patterns. Old interviews, forgotten beefs, strange alliances, moments that didn't make sense at the time suddenly lining up like dominoes. And once those dominoes start falling, you can't pretend you didn't see them wobbling for years. Fans are calling it shocking. Critics are calling it dangerous. Insiders are calling it not surprising, which is always the scariest response. Because when the industry reacts like this, it's never about one revelation, it's about what people have been avoiding for decades. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't gossip. This is 50 Cent doing what he does best, smiling while lighting the fuse and daring everyone to act surprised when it blows. Because the moment people realized what 50 Cent was actually doing with this project, the conversation shifted from curiosity to discomfort. This wasn't a highlight reel. This wasn't a celebration of legacy. This was a slow, deliberate walk through rooms the industry has spent decades pretending were empty. The most unsettling part is how familiar everything feels. The documentary doesn't open with bombastic claims or dramatic narration. It opens with history, footage people have seen before, but never watched this way. Interviews that once felt harmless, moments that were laughed off, clipped from memes, or brushed aside as industry talk. The difference now is context. And once context enters the picture, the past stops looking random. 50 Cent doesn't rush the reveal. He lets the audience sit with patterns. The same names appearing again and again. The same alliances forming and reforming. The same silence, following controversies that would have ended anyone else's career. And that's where the tension builds, because repetition isn't coincidence. It's structure. What the documentary does brilliantly and dangerously is refuse to spoon-feed conclusions. Instead, it places evidence side by side and lets viewers connect dots that suddenly feel impossible to ignore. Old beefs aren't framed as petty drama anymore. They're reframed as warning signs. Power struggles disguised as personality clashes. Control masked as mentorship. The early focus on Diddy and Jay-Z isn't explosive in the way people expected. There's no single gotcha moment. No instant scandal clip designed to trend. Instead, there's something worse, a slow realization that certain rules never applied to them the way they applied to everyone else. Viewers are already calling out how the documentary highlights selective accountability, how artists around these figures were scrutinized, punished, or erased, while the core power structure remained untouched. Careers destroyed for whispers, others protected despite storms. And once that imbalance becomes visible, it's hard to unsee. The internet's reaction says everything. This wasn't met with immediate outrage. It was met with pause. Threads that start with "I don't know how to feel about this." Comments filled with "this actually explains a lot." Silence from people who usually can't resist jumping into discourse. When the loudest reaction is quiet processing. Something hit too close. What makes this even more uncomfortable is how the documentary treats time. It doesn't stay in one era. It jumps decades effortlessly, showing how the same dynamics evolved but never disappeared. The fashion changed. The music changed. The rules didn't. Power stayed centralized. Loyalty stayed enforced. And silence stayed profitable. 50 Cent's role in all of this is especially unsettling because he never pretends neutrality. He's not acting shocked. He's not asking questions on behalf of the audience. He's presenting the story like someone who's been waiting years for people to finally listen. There's no urgency in his tone, only inevitability. And that tone matters. Because urgency suggests panic. Inevitability suggests truth. The documentary doesn't frame Diddy and Jay-Z as cartoon villains. That would be too easy. Instead, it frames them as products and architects of a system that rewards dominance, discourages dissent, and punishes anyone who doesn't play their role perfectly. That framing is far more dangerous than any direct accusation because it implicates more than two names. Fans watching this aren't reacting with shock alone. They're reacting with recognition. Old rumors resurface, but now they feel heavier. Not because they're new, but because they're contextualized. Stories that were dismissed as jealousy or bitterness suddenly feel like fragments of a larger picture, and the documentary keeps returning to one unspoken question. If so many people saw pieces of this for years, why did no one say anything? The answer hangs in the air without being spoken. Because in an industry built on access, speaking out has consequences. Careers stall, doors close, calls stop coming, and the documentary makes it clear that silence wasn't accidental, it was incentivized. There's a particularly chilling stretch where multiple past moments are shown back to back. Moments that once felt disconnected suddenly feel coordinated. Not in a conspiracy theory way, but in a this is how power behaves when unchecked way. It's not about secret meetings. It's about influence. About who gets protected when things get uncomfortable. That's where the sarcasm cuts deepest. Because the documentary doesn't need to exaggerate. The irony is baked in. The same industry that sells rebellion as branding is shown punishing real resistance. The same voices that preach authenticity are shown benefiting from silence. Viewers online are already comparing this to other exposes that changed how entire industries were viewed. Not because of one revelation, but because of cumulative weight. This feels less like gossip and more like a structural audit, and nobody likes being audited. What really sets the tone for what's coming next is how early reactions from insiders have played out. Not denials, not counter-arguments, just distance. A careful refusal to engage. And when people who usually rush to defend themselves choose quiet instead, it tells you the story isn't as easy to dismiss as they'd like. By the end of this first stretch, one thing is clear. This documentary isn't trying to cancel anyone. It's trying to make people look. And looking is dangerous. Because once you see the system clearly, you can't pretend it's just personality conflicts or isolated incidents anymore. Within hours of the documentary circulating, the internet split into two camps that both pretended they weren't nervous. One side called it old news dressed up for clicks. The other side said, if this feels uncomfortable, maybe it's because it's accurate. And floating between those extremes was a third, quieter group, the ones who stopped posting entirely. That silence was louder than any tweet, because when a documentary is nonsense, the industry laughs it off. When it's dangerous, the industry debates it. But when it's accurate enough to rattle power, the industry goes quiet and starts checking its legal exposure. Posts got deleted, interviews got postponed, and suddenly, people who had opinions about everything developed sudden cases of selective muteness. Meanwhile, the internet did what it always does when authority looks shaky. It turned the situation into a spectacle. Memes flooded timelines, comparing the documentary to Pandora's box, to a vault cracking open, to a slow-motion domino collapse. Some joked that NDAs everywhere were sweating. Others said this felt like watching a magician explain the trick while the assistants panic. Backstage, and then came the reaction videos. Creators dissected every frame like it was a Zapruder film. Clips were paused, zoomed in, replayed with dramatic music added for emphasis. People started pulling up decade-old interviews and laying them next to documentary segments, saying things like, why does this line up too well? The internet's favorite phrase made a comeback: connect the dots. Once that phrase trends, the story stops being controllable. Celebrity reactions, or the absence of them, became its own subplot. Some public figures posted vague captions about truth coming to light without naming names. Others shared cryptic emojis, the modern equivalent of whispering while pointing. A few tried humor, joking that they were staying offline for peace, which only made people more suspicious, because nothing says this doesn't concern me like announcing you're avoiding the topic. The most telling reaction was how defensive certain fan bases got. Not with evidence, with emotion. Accusations of jealousy, claims of cloud chasing, the kind of arguments people use when they're trying to protect an image rather than debate facts. When loyalty becomes louder than logic, it usually means the conversation hit too close to home. Public outrage grew unevenly. Some viewers demanded accountability, asking why these patterns were ignored for so long. Others accused 50 Cent of stirring chaos for profit, conveniently ignoring how long these conversations have existed in fragments. The documentary didn't invent suspicion, it organized it. And that organization made people uncomfortable. Pop culture comparisons flooded the discourse. People likened this moment to past industry reckonings that started quietly and then swallowed entire careers. Others said this felt like the opening episode of a series where everyone knows the finale won't be pretty. The jokes were sharp, but the undertone was anxious. Nobody was laughing freely. What really escalated things was how insiders reacted indirectly, not by addressing the claims, but by reframing the conversation. Suddenly, articles popped up about the dangers of conspiracy thinking. Panels discussed media literacy. The focus shifted away from the content of the documentary and toward the audience's reaction to it. A classic maneuver. When you can't control the message, question the messenger and the people listening. That move didn't calm anyone. It poured gasoline on the fire. Because viewers noticed the deflection, they pointed out how quickly the narrative moved from "this isn't true" to "you shouldn't be asking these questions." And when institutions tell people not to ask questions, curiosity doesn't die. It mutates. The documentary's most replayed segments weren't even the most dramatic ones. They were the quiet comparisons, the repeated imagery, the way similar situations produced wildly different outcomes depending on who was involved. That disparity became the centerpiece of online discussion. Not guilt, not innocence, power. And power hates being named. 50 Cent's role became a topic in itself. People debated his motives, his history, his grudges. But even critics admitted one thing: he knows the industry. He knows how narratives are protected. And he knows how silence works. Whether you like him or not, his proximity gives weight to the questions he's raising. The memes grew darker as the days passed. Less jokes, more irony. Less punchlines, more side eyes. Screenshots of old headlines resurfaced with captions like "this hits different now." The internet's collective memory woke up, and it doesn't forget easily. What truly pushed this into full escalation was the sense that something bigger was being avoided, not addressed. Avoided. Every non-response felt deliberate. Every vague statement felt rehearsed. And when audiences sense choreography, they assume there's something being hidden behind the curtain. The outrage wasn't explosive, it was corrosive, slowly eating away at the comfort people had with familiar narratives. Icons stopped feeling untouchable. Success stories started looking conditional. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. This phase of the story wasn't about conclusions. It was about destabilization, about shaking confidence in the myths people grew up with. The documentary didn't need to prove everything. It just needed to make certainty impossible. And it succeeded. Because now, every past moment feels recontextualized. Every interview replayed through a new lens. Every silence feels heavier. The audience isn't asking, "Is this true?" anymore. They're asking, "What else don't we know?" That's the point of no return. Once the audience starts asking that question, the story stops being about one documentary and starts being about the entire system that allowed those questions to be postponed for so long. When the volume finally dipped, it didn't bring relief. It brought recalculation, the kind that happens behind closed doors, in boardrooms and group chats that never leak, where people stop debating narratives and start assessing risk. This wasn't the aftermath of a viral clip that burns hot and disappears. This was the kind of moment that changes how people move. The first thing that shifted was tone, not outrage, distance. Statements got shorter. Appearances became selective. People who once name-dropped with pride suddenly found reasons to talk about new directions and fresh chapters. It was subtle, but it was everywhere. That's how you know a story landed. When nobody says we're worried, but everyone quietly steps back. The documentary didn't force conclusions. It forced caution, and caution spreads faster than certainty. What made the fallout especially potent was how it reframed legacy. For years, success stories in this space were treated like finished products, polished, untouchable, immune to revision. The documentary cracked that illusion. not by tearing statues down, but by showing the scaffolding behind them. And once audiences see scaffolding, they start asking who built it, who maintained it, and who got pushed off while it went up. Public perception didn't flip overnight. It tilted, a little less saw, a little more scrutiny. Fans who once defended automatically started qualifying their praise. I still respect the work, but that but matters. It's the sound of certainty loosening. It's how icons become human again and how power starts to look conditional. Behind the scenes, alliances reportedly cooled, not with dramatic fallouts, but with calendar changes and unanswered emails. The kind of distancing that doesn't trend, but reshapes access. In industries built on proximity, distance is a statement, and the documentary made proximity feel risky. The most telling development wasn't a lawsuit or a press tour. It was the strategic patience. No rush to debunk, no aggressive counters. Just waiting, letting the cycle move, betting on fatigue. That strategy works when stories are flimsy. It's less effective when the story introduced a framework instead of a rumor. Frameworks stick. And that's the real damage here, not accusation, but recontextualization. People started rewatching old moments with new eyes. Interviews once celebrated for confidence now felt evasive. Jokes once brushed off felt sharper, not because new facts emerged, but because the audience's lens changed. Once the lens shifts, everything looks different. Even if the picture stays the same, the documentary's ripple effect extended beyond the names on the poster. It reached managers, executives, platforms, anyone who benefited from the old arrangement. When the conversation turns structural, responsibility expands. That's uncomfortable. It's easier to argue about personalities than systems. This project refused that comfort. Critics tried to collapse the conversation back into motive. They asked why now. They questioned grudges. They framed it as entertainment disguised as truth. But even those critiques carried an admission: the questions weren't new. The timing was. And timing, in an era of collective memory, is everything. What followed was a recalibration of language. You could hear it in interviews, read it in captions. People stopped speaking in absolutes. They hedged. They acknowledged complexity. That may sound small, but it's seismic. Absolutes protect power. Complexity invites accountability. The audience's role changed too. Viewers weren't just consuming anymore. They were cross-checking, comparing, remembering. The documentary turned passive fans into active archivists. And archives are dangerous because they don't forget and they don't care who you are. This wasn't cancellation, it was corrosion. Slower, quieter, more permanent. The industry's favorite defense that time heals everything felt shaky here. Time doesn't heal patterns once they're recognized. It only reveals whether they were addressed. And the absence of visible addressing made the silence heavier, not safer. What makes this chapter linger is the absence of a villain arc. No dramatic confession, no courtroom crescendo, just a system shown from enough angles that denial feels like a choice. The documentary didn't ask the audience to hate. It asked them to notice. And noticing is irreversible. As weeks passed, the conversation settled into a hum. Not trending, but persistent. The kind that resurfaces every time a related headline drops. Every future success now carries a footnote. Every celebration invites a sidebar. That's how legacies change, not with a bang, but with annotations. And then there's the part nobody wants to say out loud. This won't be the last project to do this. Frameworks invite sequels. Once one vault opens, people start checking the others. The documentary didn't close a chapter. It introduced a genre. In the end, the biggest consequence isn't what it claims or proves. It's what it normalized: the idea that power can be examined without permission, that legacy can be revisited, that silence isn't neutral. Those ideas don't fade. The story doesn't end with a verdict. It ends with a posture shift. People standing differently in rooms, listening harder, choosing words carefully. That's how change actually begins, when the room adjusts before anyone admits why. All right. Now it's your turn, because documentaries like this don't drop unless someone wants a reaction. If this breakdown made you pause, rewind, or suddenly remember moments that hit different now, smash that like button like it's been sitting on secrets for 20 years. Don't be gentle. This isn't a lullaby. Head straight to the comments and tell me what you think. Did 50 Cent actually expose something the industry's been dodging for decades? Or is this just perfectly timed chaos wrapped in a documentary budget? Are Diddy and Jay-Z victims of narrative manipulation? Or did this project finally connect dots people were told not to see? Pick a side or explain why both sides are playing games. No safe takes. Say it with your chest. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel doesn't wait for headlines to get comfortable. We break down power, patterns, and public silence while everyone else pretends not to notice. When the industry starts whispering and deleting posts, this is where the real conversation happens. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because stories like this never end with one documentary. They ripple, they resurface, and suddenly everyone acts shocked when the next shoe drops. We stay ahead of that cycle. And remember, this wasn't just about two names or one film. It was about how power moves quietly, how silence gets rewarded, and how long the audience was expected to clap without asking questions. This is Truth Tattle, where the dots get connected, the silence gets loud, and the story